part of a series that we're doing this year called Women's Work. And we really wanted to highlight the many roles of women in the fishing community. So eventually in the fall, we will have an exhibit that looks at women at sea, women on shore, women at home, and women in the community, because women really have been involved in every aspect of the fishing industry, from being fishermen themselves to being advocates for the industry, to marketing the seafood, to, I mean, really the whole gamut of it, to working in shoreside industries, to being boat owners. But tonight we also wanted to pay tribute to the roles that women play in fishing families, because what you live every day is very unique and quite different from those of us who are not in fishing families. And the stories that I've heard over the years are really fascinating, I think. And I think we have a lot to learn. I think it makes for very strong women. And so I'm excited to get into the program tonight. I do want to acknowledge some support that we received, because we can not do our programs without financial support. So this event is particularly supported by a Bridge Street scholarship from the Mass Humanities Foundation. And also it is part of, as I said, this series that's going to go on all year and culminate with an exhibit. And the series and the exhibit are sponsored by the National Endowment for the Arts, the New Bedford, Fairhaven, Dartmouth, Westport, Marion, and Mattapoisett Cultural Councils, and the Women's Fisheries Network. So we're really super grateful to all of those organizations for supporting our work. And we're really excited to really shine a lens on the important contributions that women make in the fishing community. So tonight we have three different people who are going to share experiences from different perspectives. And what I think I'll have each of you do is to kind of introduce yourselves and just talk a little bit about your particular role in the fishing community. I'll just name each of you. So Ruth Blount, and Kaylin Quinton, and Judith or Judy. I mean, I know you as Judy. Is that okay, Judy?
Yeah.
So maybe we'll start. Can we start with you, Judy? And you want to just say a little bit about who you are and your role? Yeah.
Sure, no problem. I'm Judy Ramus, Judy Mano Ramus, my single name. My father was a fisherman, my grandfather, and all the way back. My father owned 6 draggers and 1 scalloper back in the day. My husband is a fisherman. My son-in-law is a fisherman. My son would have been a fisherman, but he married a girl in Western Mass, and there is no ocean in Western Mass. So he's not a fisherman. And I have a young grandson that's 17 that's in vocational high right now. And he is taking welding so he can go fishing, and we won't have to be struggling to look for a welder. So he's going to be going fish. His first fishing trip will be this summer. I was the president of Offshore Mariners, which was an ad hoc group trying to battle the regulations against the fishing industry. The ground fishermen did not do so well. So we were able to sell our draggers, but we remained with our scallopers. The reason the scallopers remained was because very united, and they didn't mind paying for legal fees and attorneys, and that's what saved the whole industry. At least we have a scallop industry remaining because of the legal foundation, and we still continue to pay legal fees for them to help us. And that's that.
So Judy kind of is a mother, a daughter, a wife,
granddaughter.
Granddaughter.
Yeah,
kind of, really the wide gamut of all of that. Yes. And also a boat owner, I might add, in addition to being an advocate and those things. So thank you, Judy. And I know some of the stories that I've asked Judy to make sure to share, and I know you're in for a treat with some of those. So we'll get to the stories in a few minutes, but I'm going to ask Ruth to kind of do the same thing and talk a little bit about your connection to the fishing industry and how you got involved.
Okay, my name is Ruth Blount, and I am married to Bill, who is a captain and owner of the fishing vessel Ruthie B. He built it, he's an engineer, and he built it in 1979. So it's been a long time now. We keep repairing it and building it up in his family shipyard Blount Marine. And we lived for 45 years in Nantucket, and then 3 years ago moved here to New Bedford. And I feel like almost in awe of you, Judy, because you've been so immersed in the whole life of fishing. But I did not come from a fishing family at all. I just fell in love with Bill, who happened to be a fisherman. And I married him, and we moved to Nantucket, where there were small bay scallopers, but there were no draggers. And so I was a fisherman's wife, facing many of the same challenges that anyone else here in New Bedford faces, but without knowing that it was normal for the fishing industry, and without having that kind of the community support that I have seen in the fishing industry and among wives. And not that we didn't have wonderful friends or community support as far as friendships and church and everything else, but I did not really understand. And Bill pretty much fished and sold out of New Bedford. So we raised our 7 children on Nantucket, but Bill would basically be commuting back and forth when the dockage got too expensive for us on Nantucket, and we had a lot of financial strain. We needed to sell. But one of the things that I just really appreciate, and I've often said this, is when we decided to move to New Bedford, and Bill had met Laura already and, you know, talked to her quite a bit. And when I walked in there, it was as if I had come home. When I looked around and I saw the pictures and just all of the parts of it, it was like, oh my goodness, you know, what I've experienced all these years, all the other wives are experiencing also. It was really incredible. Someone had done a documentary on called Ruthie B, sort of showing me, Ruthie B, and the boat Ruthie B, and sort of the love-hate relationship between it, perhaps. And a sociologist had done a study on fishing families, and she reported some of the things in the documentary. And I read the transcript. This is 15, 20 years ago. And I started crying because I thought, oh my gosh, that, you know, what we have felt and what we have done, and the experience of Bill coming home and adjusting to that, and then leaving and adjusting to that, and fish prices and crew things and regulations and all of those things. I realized that is a common denominator. But I still haven't gotten to know as many fishing families as I'd like. Bill and I really had a goal for that. And then with COVID, it was harder to have people over for dinner or whatever. But I'm looking forward as everything opens up. But to me, fishing is something that I don't have many of the experiences of being an advocate or whatever that you did, Judy, and I'm so appreciative of it. But I do have a deep love and respect for the men and women who work in fishing, and I'm so grateful to be a part of it as Bill's wife. So.
Thank you, Ruth. And we're really, really happy to have you in the community in New Bedford, and such a huge part of what we do at the Fishing Heritage Center. Okay, Kaylin, last but certainly.
Yeah, my name is Kaylin Quinton. Recently, Kaylin Duquette. I got married a few weeks ago. but I grew up in a fishing family. My dad was a fisherman. His dad was a fisherman. So my grandfather, his father and stepfather were fishermen. My Aunt Tammy, so my dad's sister, fished for a while. She married a fisherman. Both of her sons fish now. So it has, I sort of always grew up with it. And I think as a young person, when your parents do something, you don't really care that much, right? It's just like, oh yeah, all right, dads are fishermen, whatever. And it's interesting, like especially since getting involved with the center, I think back over, how the narrative changes, right? Like when you're young, I remember going to the boat with my dad, and he would take me in the wheelhouse, and we would, play captain and mate, and it was like so exciting. And when dad would come home, we'd go pick him up, and it's just like this, ooh, dad's, like, it was so exciting and magical, and then becoming a teenager, and it was like, ooh, when's dad gonna be out for 2 weeks so I can get away with stuff?
Yeah.
And like, sort of going through that phase of, he'd come home and be tired and beat up, and like me not really understanding, just like being in my own world of like, yeah, all right, that's your job, that's what you do, whatever. And then becoming an adult and sort of realizing everything that went into that. So he did pass away at sea. He was lost at sea in 2017. And after that, of course that changes you, right? And I got involved with the center afterwards. And, I think anytime you lose someone you love, you sort of look at their life differently. And, in this case, the profession, and being able to look back and, be at the center, which I'm so appreciative to Laura and everybody who has made that happen. It really gives families, whether, deceased, alive, like sort of Ruth was touching on, like it feels like home, and you can find people that have similar experiences to you and can relate to you in a way. And I'm just so grateful to the Fishing Heritage Center and Laura and Hannah and Liz and everyone there and all the volunteers that can make stuff like this happen and give families a platform to celebrate what makes this profession special and New Bedford special. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And my husband, although not a fisherman, does work in the fishing industry. He works at Turk Seafood, for anybody who lives in the area and is familiar with that. And he loves Bill, Ruth's husband. And anytime he gets any flounder, anything from the Ruthie B, he always talks about how beautiful it is and how that's what he's going to bring home because it looks so good that night. So definitely get your seafood from the Ruthie B.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's my intro, I guess.
That's great. That's a nice connection and nice intro. And I did know Kaylin's father before I knew Kaylin, and he was actually somebody who was quite involved in the programming that we did at the festival and going on the cruise ships. And he was a wonderful storyteller and just a great representative of the fishing community. And so miss him. And I was incredibly impressed when I met Kaylin, which was at her father's memorial service at the Seamen's Bethel. And she was just so poised in speaking about him. Really, I couldn't imagine how much, I can't imagine how much that took to get up there and do that. And I was thrilled when Kaylin kind of came to the center and we roped her in. And then I will just share a little thing, which is that a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, or you'll have to, it was April 16th or 17th.
Oh, the wedding was the 17th.
So I had been working at the Fishing Heritage Center that day, Saturday, and I don't normally work on Saturdays, and it was time to close up, and I got everything locked up, and we just reopened, so we're all kind of getting used to being there again. Anyway, I locked everything up, and I walked out the door and realized that I hadn't brought in the sandwich boards. So I went back in and unlocked everything, and then I walked up the street to get the sandwich boards, and who was coming out of the Seamen's Bethel but Kaylin Quinton Duquette and her entire wedding party. And so it just felt very beautiful because I had met you at the Seamen's Bethel on a much sadder time, and it was wonderful to see that. So just full circle and a really nice thing. So I was
I'm
going to
ready. It's too early, Laura. It's too
no,
early.
no, no, no. I was going to quote from our exhibit, actually, and now I can't find the quote, which I had pulled up. But Ellen Score, who's a fishing family member, we used a quote from her that kind of on a panel that talks about family and community. And I think she says something to the effect of being in a fishing family is a whole way of life. And I would be curious to have each of you talk a little bit about what you think makes, I mean, you've only sort of known that life, although Ruth didn't grow up in it, but it is very unique. And I'd be curious if you can talk a little bit about, what kinds of things make your experience a little different. What is unique about being in a fishing family? And maybe an easier way to start would be to think a little bit about growing up. I mean, I know Ruth doesn't have a lot to say about that, but you are a mother, so you've had children and watched them grow up. Judy was a kid growing up in the industry. Kaylin was a kid, so what's it like to be a kid in a fishing family?
Oh, not much different than Kaylin. When I was a teenager, was his dad going out today? And where I come from, we're Portuguese, very Portuguese. The food was a lot of boiled fish, olive oil, and vinegar. At least once a day, one meal was fish, and the other one would be either soup or whatever. And when Dad was out fishing, it was like, oh, it was heaven, because my mom was an American. She also came from a fishing family, but America's was chop suey, it was good stuff. No lobster, none of that. We had good stuff. So yay, we get our menu all set up. It was tough because I saw my mom many times. We'd get in the car, the old Buick, and go around the fort, go down the docks in the winter. There was really an old Zenith radio that was more static than anything else. And when you saw the lights coming in, we'd follow them into the dock and find out, did you see the Mary J. Landry? Did you see the Libby? The old Eastern rigs which were very easy to topple over in the winter. They'd freeze over and they just lay over on side. I remember when I was 12, my father was gone overdue. I think it was like 5 or 6 days, which they only took so many days of food with them and water. You couldn't really drink the water on the boat because it was kind of, it just wasn't good. It wasn't like today. And my mom had the entire crew stay at our house, the women and the children. And we'd be around the Zenith radio listening to static, waiting for a Coast Guard call, something. It was February, very bad winds, it was terrible. Like I said, ship to shore radio, but that's when you could get it, the marine operator. And all of a sudden we got a phone call. We were there at the house maybe about 3 days. And my mother got the phone call from the Coast Guard that she was coming in. To quote my mom's been gone a long time. She's coming in on a wing and a prayer, but she's coming in. And it just got chills. And when we all went down to the wharf, and when that boat came in, the ropes, and I am not exaggerating, were this thick with ice. The guys were exhausted. They kept chiseling the ice off the masts to ease up the weight from the boat. And there must have been a baby boom 9 months later because those women were ecstatic to see their husbands, I'm telling you. It was tough. Being Portuguese have very unique customs, and Laura likes this one. I'm not embarrassed by it because that's just the way it was. My daughter had to do the same thing. And she's only 43, so I'm 64. So back then it was whatever. They would get the skipper or the boat owners, if they had a daughter, if the skipper and the boat owner didn't have a daughter, the first mate would have a daughter. Somebody had to have a daughter, a baby, like 2-3 years old. And they put her, this was on a ground fishing boat, and they put her on top of the net, bare bottomed, and all the crew would stand around her and go, shh, shh. So she could tinkle on the nets, because that was good luck. So make the shushing sound. And as soon as you tinkled, yay, and you get a cookie or something. So that was a tradition. My daughter has 2 sons, so they lucked out. But the mate's daughter refused to, the mate's wife refused to allow that to happen. So they basically had a wet diaper. You improvise, right? And they kind of like put it on the nets. But I don't know if that was what it was, but I'm gonna tell you, my father was a very good fisherman, and my husband was a very good fisherman. So it maybe has something to do with that. Unique being and Ruthie, I admire you. My daughter-in-law and my son, they were supposed to stay in New Bedford, and he was supposed to go fishing, and she said, I can't do this. I can't raise my children alone. There's no way. And it does take a special person, a special woman, to be married to a fisherman, because you're not just a mother, you're a father. You can't say when they break when they break the furnace or whatever it is, say wait till your dad comes home, because by the time they get home, it's forgotten. Or when dad comes home, he doesn't want to be the bad guy after being away so long. So you have to be mother, you have to be father, you have to make the decisions. There's certain decisions you can't wait for. You have to, if you need a plumber, you got to get that plumber. You got to dick her a price. You got to, so you're male and female in this relationship. Then when the babies are coming, there's no guarantee that today it's a little bit better, but back then that boat had to go out. There's no guarantee that you're going to be home for that baby. My daughter came 4 weeks early, and my husband had planned when it came close to stay home a trip to be with me. He got a phone call out fishing, and he thought they were lying. They were just trying to yank his chains. Yeah, right. But then when they kept repeating it, and he said, no, this is true. He came home. Lucky enough, he was on my father's boat, so there was no repercussion. My father wanted him home to see the daughter. But as soon as he came in, I was just leaving, because he had found out a few days after, because like I said, there was no cell phones at the time. I was leaving at midnight to see my daughter, feed my daughter, because she was in special care nursery. And I see my mom's car jetting up the emergency room driveway. And out comes my husband, bloodshot, fishing boots, fish scales all over his clothes, stinking of diesel and fish, but this was fresh fish. And going in, they didn't want to let him in. And he says he's going to see his baby. She was in the incubator and all. For my son, I lucked out. He was home. He happened to be home. My son wasn't impatient like my daughter, which she still is. He waited for the timing, so he was home for that. But I saw my mother go through all that stuff. So Ruthie, to be someone that had love and only love to guide her, God bless you. Because it is not an easy life if you haven't had experience and seen it done by other women in your life, People say, oh, you're very outspoken, you're very bossy. Well, yeah, I have to be. It was a struggle when my husband decided to retire, because it's like, okay, now who's wearing the pants here again? You had to relax and step back on it, But yeah, it's interesting. I was the only woman member of Offshore Mariners. They elected me as vice president. I was vice president for 2 years. Then they elected me as a president. And I would go to all the meetings with me and 10, 11 men. Sometimes I felt like they were my apostles. And we go into Washington, D.C. and shake our heads. Oh my God, they're out to just shut us down. But I wouldn't exchange those experiences of meeting all those different men, Norwegians, Portuguese, Italians, and the thing is, all different nationalities. And we all have the same lifestyle, all of us, the wives, the husbands, the kids, all of us. Yeah, it was interesting.
Thank you for sharing all that. So Ruth, I'm curious, you have 7 children. How was Bill home for all of those births?
He was home for all but one. And that's really remarkable. And the hard thing was with the one, we were under so much pressure financially that he had to leave. It was my due date, and he had to leave because it was, we had to get a mortgage payment in. And so we knew he was going to miss it. And, you know, that was tough. But he tells me that when he got the call via radio, that the crew said that he just went down below and sat on his bunk and cried, you know, joyful tears, but sad tears as well. But anyway, it's those things. The our boys fished with him from the time in the summers, from the time they were 10 until they went to college or whatever they did after high school. And they didn't choose to go into fishing. And I think it's because just our own personal experience. It was just a really hard struggle the whole time financially. And so they chose a different path. But what they are grateful to Bill for is teaching them the value of hard work. And they have repeatedly said that. And that's what I think is one of the biggest gifts, is just the really salt of the earth, working with your hands, just carrying on a trade that has been since the beginning of time. So whatever.
And did you, so being on Nantucket, I mean, you've already touched on kind of not having the community and the support. And I'm thinking about other women that I've talked to who were sort of in your position, where they married into a fishing family and, you know, really had to kind of learn the expectations. Did you have people you could at least call, or were you really just figuring it out on your own?
Call another woman?
Yeah.
Or, no, except for Kirsten Bendixson, who I had met at a funeral, I never met another fishing family until 3 years ago, when we moved here. I mean, if I was with Bill in New Bedford, he'd introduce me to the other men who, or I suppose women who happened to be there. But as far as having any relationship, I did not know another dragging family. So I really did not, looking back, I find it hard to, everything I learned, it was just by living it, you know? And not knowing, I think one of the best things about the fishing center is I've realized Bill isn't as eccentric and strange as I thought he was all those 50 years. You know, he's pretty normal, wonderful and normal, and just like all the other fishermen. You know, it was kind of a relief, like, whew.
So Kaylin, I mean, you wouldn't remember perhaps, but was your father able to be home when you and your brother were born?
He was, yeah. We were fortunate that, like, I mean, he fished for over 30 years. For the last 17 years of it, he was a captain. So, I mean, he would do his best, you know, to sort of time things, but there were definitely birthdays that were missed, and, you know, certain holidays, like Christmas, he'd always be home for, but other things, it was like, you know, sort of a hit or miss. And I can remember, you know, our mom always being frustrated, right? Like, well, how am I supposed to plan around this or that? And, you know, you think you're going to go out and there's bad weather and things happen. I mean, it's still, like I mentioned, Laura mentioned 3 weeks ago, I got married, and my cousins, Hudson and Dalton, who are both fishermen, had wanted to be there. There was an issue with the boat, they couldn't be, you know? So it's still, thanks to technology and all of that, it's easier to plan, but you still never know. There's going to be, you know, and he recently had a baby and he needed to go out to make that last trip, you know, before baby came. And it's interesting how, you know, obviously things are a lot easier, but also some things stay the same, you know, and I think that's interesting, just how that happens. And yeah, and I mean, just being a kid in a fishing family, like Judy had sort of mentioned, like, oh, God, I don't want scallops. Like my dad was a scalloper. So, you know, you kind of get spoiled with what you have and you think that, oh yeah, this, like, I remember my dad, he'd bring home a mess, like at the end of the trip, they'd call him a mess. He would get a mess of scallops. Everybody would get a mess of scallops and he would package them. He'd like vacuum seal them and everything and put them in the freezer. And whenever we like went to a, you know, housewarming party or, you know, a gift or whatever, he would bring scallops. And I remember thinking like, it was so weird. I'm like, Dad, why do you like, you're just bringing Ziploc bags of scallops? Like, why would you do that? And now, of course, like being older, I get it, right? And he would do this thing. And again, I would get embarrassed about this. And now I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so sweet. He was a big supporter of military. And anytime we would be out, a lot of times at BJ's, the wholesale store, because that's where he would be grubbing up for the boat. And if he saw somebody with a veteran's hat on, he would approach them and introduce himself and, you know, just sort of make small talk and say, you know, thank you for your service. Do you want some scallops? She would end up getting their phone number. And I think there was like once or twice they were freaked out, but for the most part, like they'd give him his number and they'd end up meeting up somewhere and he would bring them scallops to thank them for their service. And like, that was that. And I just remember thinking, that is so bizarre. And now, you know, like, oh, how sweet. And that person was so happy they got to eat scallops that night, you know? So yeah, there's, and just like, I think a lot of little stories, like growing up in it, it was always this like love-hate thing. And, you know, Ruth had sort of touched on this, like, so I have a brother and my dad never wanted him to go into fishing and just like, it's too hard, like it's dangerous. His father died of a heart attack, but both of his grandfathers were lost at sea. And it was actually his, so his dad's mom, it was both of her husbands. So she married a fisherman. He was lost at sea in 52. She married another fisherman and he was lost at sea in 70. So I grew up and like my dad, he always had like a get rich quick scheme. And this was like right from high school. Like he went to Voc for carpentry because he wanted to build a bowling alley and that's how he was gonna like make his living. Or then like later he was gonna like have football bets and like later he was gonna open like an indoor theme park. Like he always had these like get rich quick schemes of like how he was gonna get out of the industry and like, oh, it's so dangerous. Like, I don't want you doing this. I don't want you marrying a fisherman. Like it's too dangerous. But then always him like loving it, you know, like having that pride, but also not wanting his children to have to deal with the things he dealt with and the loss that his family had dealt with. So I think there are always mixed messages, but now, you know, being older and looking back on it, that juxtaposition of loving what you do, but knowing that it might not be the best thing, you know, for your family in certain ways, but also knowing that, you know, if scalloping especially has been blessed, right, with the money that they can make, you know, somebody who doesn't have a college education can make a better life for their family and just improve their lives. And maybe that's dangerous, but that's what they're going to do. And I think when you talk to a lot of people, like fishermen sometimes get a bad rap, right? And of course, like there's always bad eggs in any industry, but like for the most part, it's a lot of guys that just want to do better for themselves or their family. And sometimes it ends well and sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, like I think I got to grow up seeing that, like hard work and self-made and a little bit of crazy. But yeah, overall, I think it was a good existence. And I was lucky, he would be home. Like he'd be gone for 2 weeks, but then he'd be home for 2 weeks. You know, and sometimes there'd be like, oh, he'd only be home for a few days and have to go back out. But he would always say how like he was lucky, right? Yeah, most dads came home at 6 o'clock, but then all right, they ate dinner and they were tired, and it's like he would come home, like spend a solid 48 hours sleeping, and then all right, I'm home now. Like we're gonna play and have fun and go do things every day because dad's home. So, I think that was special.
Sometimes, as Judy mentioned, we would have you start getting your own routines without them. And I think that's always the trickiest thing, because like Friday night was movie and pizza night, but Bill would be out there dreaming when he came in. Guess what, kids? We're going to have a big turkey dinner with all the fixings and pie and squash and everything. And he'd come in and it would be like, Friday, tonight we're going to have a turkey. It would be like, what, Dad? It's Friday night. We can't do that, But Bill never ever cared, and I think fishing increased this, never cared about really what day it was. It was just, his schedule. But another thing something that you said, I think, Caitlin, that reminded me, we had a saying with kids growing up, when we couldn't really afford Hamburg, we'd have to have lobster. And so many people just got a kick out of that, So it's a nice, easy way to get brownie points with friends, though, is to give them seafood.
Yes, it is. And then on the flip side, though, I know there were many times when he would try to like pawn off the extra like grub. So bread being one of the things that was the worst, because it like absorbs that diesel fuel smell. So and he would like try to sneak it in, and he'd like just put it in the pantry and like see what would happen. And you'd always know, because you would like open the pantry, it was just like diesel fuel right in your face. Like, Dad, I'm not eating this bread. It came from the boat. Stop trying to feed it to me. So that like when I was younger, he would take us to like Buttonwood Park, and we'd give it to the ducks and stuff. Like they didn't really seem to mind, but it was funny because he would even if he had a good trip, like he still wanted to be frugal, and like he worked hard. He didn't want to just, well, sometimes he would blow it on certain things, but that fisherman mentality of like work hard, play hard would sometimes kick in. But like he's like, yeah, it's perfectly good bread. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm like, well, then you eat it. You make a sandwich with it, which of course wouldn't bother him because he was used to it. So that was like a funny thing. So it's like we'd have scallops in the freezer, but we'd also have diesel fuel bread.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, right up until even after I got married, my husband and my father was ground fish, no scallop, it was just ground fish. And we lived in south end of New Bedford, where there's a lot of Portuguese fishermen that live down there. Well, thank God, because it would have been terrible. And they would catch codfish. Now, if you go to the market and buy salted cod, it's an arm and a leg. And the same thing with the diesel smelling bread. You don't spend money on fish that you catch. So you put it in a baby bathtub, little plastic things, and you salt it up really well. And then you go out fishing for 10 days. And then when they come back, it'll be nice and salted. Now we're going to have to dry this out between November and March. You would see codfish hanging off of fences, hanging off of clotheslines, hanging off of tree limbs, dried cod split open, catching the sun. And you'd have to bring it back in at night, before nighttime, because it would get humid, it would ruin the codfish. So that if they went out and went fishing, that was a woman's job. We had to go out there and you had to hang it out. Well, when I got married, I moved 2 streets away from my mom. And at that time, there weren't that many Portuguese fishermen in that area. It was my parents, and now it was us. And they didn't last long, because I think the codfish chased everybody away and stole their house, and then Portuguese people bought it. But I had hung the codfish out on the clothesline, the T-bar, the clothesline, and I had a knock on the door, and it was the Board of Health at the front door saying, "Excuse me, ma'am, we got a complaint that you have rotted fish hanging on the clothesline out in the back." And he's looking at me, and I'm saying, I have fish hanging out there, but it's not rotted. He said, well, ma'am, that causes rats. I says, I don't know of any rat that'll eat that. It's salted. So we went out there, and it was the neighbors right next door to us. And you could see them peeking through the windows. And he looked at it and he smelt it and all that stuff. And it was smelt, it didn't smell rotted, it was salted cod. And he says, why are you doing this? I says, well, do you know how much salted cod is at the store? Very expensive. He said, yeah, I know. My wife likes to make codfish cakes for the winter and you know, for the holidays. I said, hey, I already have some cut up in the freezer. Would you like some? There goes the, you know, paying off. Bribery is the best thing with food because it's not really illegal. He took a package of dried cod and I was all set and I just waved to the neighbors.
That's
I
great.
remember I would have been embarrassed. Within 2 years, all the houses would go up for sale and the Portuguese fishermen would buy it. So then we were fine. You smell sardines in the summer and see salted cod in the winter.
That's
was,
awesome.
So I wanted to see if there were any questions from other people. I can listen to these stories and it's almost like we don't need to ask a question because the conversation is just flowing. But does anybody who's listening or watching have anything they want to ask? Now's your chance.
And Kathy might have some insight. I don't know. So Kathy is you would have been my dad's cousin, right? That sometimes the tree like gets confusing. And his dad was her uncle.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's, I mean, no pressure. But if anybody else has stories or observations, I don't know if anyone else here has been
And then
in
we
the
also
fishing
have
family or in the industry, huh?
Yeah, we also have some visuals. I was going to say we could take a look at some pictures that the three of you shared. Ooh, I think Kathy.
Oh, Kathy, you're on mute. You're still on mute. There you go.
I completely forgot about that. Sorry, I had to leave before for a few minutes. So yeah, your dad and I were cousins. Well, first cousins, I guess. So anyways, fishing things about them, it was funny because, well, my dad, when he was younger and my parents were dating, Uncle Tom, so Tommy's father, you know, he'd be out on trips because when Uncle Tom was fishing, the trips were a lot longer than they're allowed to be now. So he would miss a lot of things. So with Tammy, he would fill in for Uncle Tom, which is kind of funny because the age disparity. But I remember him telling me that, like, I don't know, I think it was like daddy-daughter bowling or something. So he took Tammy bowling, and I don't know if he ever filled in like at a dance or something, but I know he said he had filled in at times, or I shouldn't say filled in, but filled Uncle Tom's role for that. But I remember more so Uncle Tom when I was growing up. Auntie Jean would have Christmas at her house, and there were so many Christmases that UncleOm missed.
No, that would be my favorite.
Yeah, your grandfather.
Tom and then Thomas.
Sorry.
My dad.
Yeah. That I should put it in context.
Okay.
And then I know, so one fishing thing is that your Aunt Tammy, when she was out on one of the boats, this was before before the kids, before Dalton and Hudson, and she had gone out and she had recorded it. Obviously it was before cell phones, so she used some kind of device to record it. And my mother got, this is almost embarrassing, but she got seasick just watching the video. she had to leave the room. So I think that put a different perspective on what kind of life it is, and you know what you're dealing with every day on a boat that's constantly moving. And she was just like, I think I'm gonna be sick. So there was that. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. And you bring up a good point of like, okay, she saw a video and then, she really grasped it. I think one of the things that's most challenging about this profession is like, you don't see what's happening, like dad or uncle or whoever comes home and is telling you, it's like, you don't see what's going on. Like it's even in the community, right? Like New Bedford is known for what? Fishing, and a lot of the residents haven't even seen what that entails. So I think that's like a really interesting point and perspective of like, you saw a video and then it like kind of helped it click, but and that's just a video.
Yeah, it was. I think she was just shucking the fish or something. It wasn't even like you could see the horizon or anything. It was just her on deck doing stuff, and she's like, "Oh my God, I gotta go." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So, but yeah, it was hard because I don't live near New Bedford. I live on the New Hampshire border. So so when we would go down to see the family, and when your grandfather Galen wasn't there for visits, it was kind of crummy because it was like, well, is Uncle Tom going to be there? But it never seemed out of the ordinary when when my cousins fished. I was just like, okay, so they're going fishing, I don't know. It never seemed out of the ordinary for me to tell people that I knew, like, oh yeah, my cousin's fishing on a boat, and they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, people still do that. I mean, it's like where do you think that stuff comes from? That fish comes from in the grocery store, Someone has to get it.
Yeah, you don't live in a coastal area. How people don't get it.
True. And this story about like the scallops with your dad, Tammy used to bring a lot of the, either the scallops or sometimes she'd give my dad lobster or things. Because my dad's a CPA, so he would do the taxes in the family. So, instead of like cutting a check, she would give him like all the seafood, So it's just cute like that.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Judy, I think
I think, Judy, did you have something you were going to say?
No, what I was going to say was, and the men I know, no matter what happened out there, the near disasters, they would never come home and tell the wives. Never. So how was your trip? Oh, it was good. It's all you ever heard. When they retire and they start talking to their crew members that are now retired, and we're at somebody's house and they start talking, remember that big wave? Remember that submarine that came up right alongside? And it's like when the perfect storm came on, my children watched it. My son, my daughter are only 13 months apart. And he was like, he was going out with my daughter-in-law. She was like maybe 24 years old. He called me up. He says, where's Dad? I said, he's here. Why? He says, I just saw a movie. I need to talk to Dad. Put him on. My son, at that time, weighed maybe about 225 pounds, 6'4". He's as big as a sequoia. He's not petite boned at all. He blubbered. My husband put the phone like this, what the heck, and I was listening. Of course, I had to listen. And he was, I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize what you went through. Oh my God, Dad, I'm so, and that's all he kept saying over and over because my husband never came home and told stories. I mean, Ruthie, Bill probably never came home and shared his terrible stories either.
Just to a degree, to a certain degree, but
not detailed.
A lot of times if I heard something, it was when he was telling somebody else later, 10 years later or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah.
think that's good because I don't think we would be as strong, we wouldn't be women as strong as we were if we knew. We'd be a bundle of nerves every time they cast off, you know? So, but they held on. They kept it to themselves, you know? Yeah. We had one friend of my husband back then, his son's godmother, and he had never been fishing before. It was his first time, and his wife was not anything to do with fishing. They were from the islands, and there was a big wave, and the boat kind of just like went over and then back. Now, this is not an Eastern rig; it's an A-frame. It's a Southern A-frame boat, and it to do that, it was a big wave. And he said, this was like maybe 10 years later. He says, when that wave came and we were soaking wet. When we finally was able to, I threw myself on the floor, blessed myself 10 times and thank you, Dean, thank you. He says, I was never religious until that day. And that's when we found out years later. Yeah.
Do you want to see some pictures? I think it might be nice to just share a little bit of. We asked each of the three of them, and it was kind of a last minute ask. So, well, thank you for pulling together what you've pulled together, and I haven't actually seen most of these. But Hannah, can you share?
Who's do you want to do first?
Oh, whatever order you have them in.
I have each person has their own little set, just so I can keep track.
See. Well, we could go in reverse order. We started with Judy and Ruth and Kaylin. We could go Kaylin.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh, wow.
So that's my dad. And that was taken, I mean, must have been in the 70s or the 80s, right? Oh, with his mustache. But I had mentioned that he went to high school. He went to Voc and for carpentry because he was going to build a bowling alley, and he wasn't going to fish like his dad. And then guess what ended up happening? Went fishing like Uncle Tom, right? So that's one of my favorite ones of him. I like that one a lot because I don't know, it's just a good picture.
Mhm.
And that's another one of him. So I think this probably must have been when he first went. He started going captain because he, like I said, the last 17 years he was captain. Well, actually, it was like 17 years, and then he went mate for the last couple. So I take that back. But I know he was always really proud of that. And I mean, he was a smart guy, but in his head, oh, he didn't go to college, he didn't have a degree, and whatever. But you could tell, like, he was always just proud of the fact that, like, he worked his way up, and we talk about like being a captain's not easy, and especially like when he started too. I mean, as time went on, they got more technology, but a lot of it was, I can remember him having like the big giant charts. Like he would actually have to like manually track like where they had gone and how the catch was, and couldn't keep it all on a computer, and he was really proud of that and working his way up. So Uncle Tom, who Kathy was talking about, that's him on the right. So that's my grandfather. And then on the left is my cousin Dalton. So my Aunt Tammy, who Kathy was also mentioning, that's her oldest. And their dad was a fisherman as well. So, from very early on, both of her boys expressed interest in fishing, and she had done some fishing as well. So she, had like, he's got his like little mini oilers, like you can see.
So cute.
Oh, I know, isn't it so cute? Like,
I've never seen him that little.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So I don't know where she found him actually. I'll probably have to ask her, but this is a great photo of the both of them. And our grandfather died when I was only 2 or 3, and Dalton was only about 5. So he's the only one that really like remembers him, and that's always a really special bond that I know he shares with him, knowing that he got to do stuff like this with him and still kind of remember it, and have the pictures. So a little bit about that one. There's my dad again, just I don't know. I was looking through and trying to find, like fishing ones that would be relevant. And I just thought his hair is kind of crazy in that one. He looks a little, but he wouldn't exactly it wasn't a huge brag about how he wouldn't shower the whole trip. It's not exactly like it was a beauty contest. Here's another one. I mean, this one, they work all hours of the night, right? I mean, anyone who's familiar with their shifts, it's usually by hours. It's not, oh, I'm working during the day and going to bed at night. They have watches. So maybe it's at night, maybe it's in the morning. So, this one I think is kind of a cool picture because, I mean, even just the look on his face, you can tell it's probably been a long watch and he's just ready to be done shucking scallops. But it's, he's got to get done. So go to the next one. So this is Dalton, maybe 4 years ago. So that picture earlier of little tiny Oilers, Dalton. Now this was, it must have been 4 or 5 years ago. Dalton had actually, after high school, had gone to Maine Maritime and gotten a degree in mechanical engineering. And he did that for a few years and decided that he wanted to go fishing. He ended up fishing, and this was a trip that he got to do with my dad, probably about a year before he passed away. And that was really special for both of them. But of course, I heard my dad's side of it the most, and that it's also it's his nephew and his godson. So and again, going back to what I said earlier, that oh, I don't want my family to do this. I don't want my son to do this. It's too dangerous. But he couldn't hide the smile on his face that he had just gone to have his first trip with his godson and nephew, and got to teach him things, and that was really special to him. So that's that one. This is just one I had taken, so I had to pick him up from the dock, and I don't know, he had this towel wrapped around his head, and he just looked so ridiculous. I was like, Dad, I want to take a picture of you, and I made him I was like, all right, hand me that bag, and it's gonna look cool, and I'm gonna take a picture of you. And he kind of was like, Caitlin, this is dumb. I'm like, Dad, please just let me do it. It's gonna be a cool picture. And I'm so glad that he let me do it, because I just think this is such a great, he's done with the trip. It's a fun picture. I'm glad I'm glad he humored me. And I actually had taken this. So I lived in the South for a few years. I went to school in Tennessee, and then I lived in Atlanta for a couple of years after that. And this was pretty soon after I'd moved back. And after living in the South, I realized how much I missed New England and the ocean and the water. And I mean, even before he passed away, I was sort of already starting to realize how special fishing was, and the waterfront and all of that. So this was, when I look at this picture, I think about that. This was when it started clicking for me, oh wow, this is really something. So I like that picture. This is done in Storyland. So, I mean, we've all sort of touched on, our men would be gone for a long time, but whenever he would be home, he would really make it a point to take us on vacations and do fun things. And New Hampshire was one of his favorite places. So, he would always just want to take us to the best places and stay at the best hotels and make sure there was an arcade and a hot tub, because, he worked hard and he wanted to make sure his family reaps the benefits of that. So that's a little bit about that one. This is a fun one. So he was a big goofball, and I know Judy and Ruth had sort of touched on how when Dad was home, all the rules changed. So I think this picture maybe captures that a little bit. He was great with kids. He loved kids, and I mean, us and all children, but he was just never afraid to get down and dirty at work and at home and be crazy and, do piggyback rides and teach me how to wrestle and just all the hands-on stuff that made him such a great dad. So it's a fun picture. So this, I had mentioned that both of my great-grandfathers, so my dad's actual grandfather and then his step-grandfather, were lost at sea. So growing up, my dad would take me to Seaman's Bethel, probably every year or so, and we would go visit the epitaphs, instead of a gravesite, and he would talk about, you know, how what he did was really dangerous, but he wanted me to know that, you know, coming home was so important to him, and he took safety so seriously because he knew how it could end. So we had gone, and one time he had brought his camera with him, and I must have been I think I was like 7 or 8 in this picture. And he had me point to each one and take a picture. And of course I'm smiling because I'm like 7. So I'm like, I don't know, what else do you do when you're pointing at a gravestone essentially? But yeah, it was really important to him for me to know like where our family came from and like what the risks were. And that's the other one, Ronald Foley, which his blood grandfather died even before he was born. His dad was only 10 when his father was lost. So Grandpa Foley was sort of the grandfather he knew. And yeah, I remember going and just thinking, I mean, feeling proud. And even though I was a kid and I maybe didn't fully understand, it was like, wow, this is a place that people come visit, and my family is there. And now my dad's name is there. And like Laura said, I got married there a few weeks ago. So that place is very special to me for good memories and, you know, sad ones, but it's a special place. So I think that's it. Oh, and then this is, I don't know if this is the last one, but this is a picture, which I don't know who took it. It must have been one of his crewmen, but I love it because whenever he would think, he would do this thing where he would like rub his nose. Like you always knew when Dad was thinking hard because he would just rub his nose. And like, you know, being a captain can be stressful, right? Like at the end of the trip, you're responsible for what you catch. And if you didn't have a good trip, like everyone looks to the captain, what did you do wrong? So he, you know, he must have been thinking.
Excuse me, Caitlin.
Yeah.
I love how he has the throttle tied up so he doesn't have to worry about that.
I see, like I didn't even realize that. That's a good observation.
Fishermen are mothers of invention, I'm telling you.
He would always talk about that. He'd be like, I got a guinea rig everything. Like he was always trying to like finagle something out at sea. But that's so funny. I think that's all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was all of them too. Those are great.
Awesome. So do we have photos from?
Yep, I have to like
you have
get
to
each
come back
person
from it.
separately. Yep. So these ones are Ruth's.
Yeah, that's just 2 of our children. They used to, this was before Luther would have gone fishing with him, but we used to love to go down and Bill would be filleting fish and skinning it, and they would be feeding the seagulls, throwing the skins out to the seagulls. So you can go through them. I don't think I have too much to say about each one. Josh was probably fishing with Bill in the summers at that age. So
That's a good one.
I like how you can see the Ruthie B in the background.
yeah. Anyway.
That's what I had from Ruth, and the ones I had from Judy are just the ones that you sent me, Laura, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have
I
to
have a lot of
compare to
pictures, but I moved last May and I got all the important stuff unpacked, but my pictures stayed. They're still packed up. That's our skull Elizabeth and Nikki. After my partner's oldest daughter and after my daughter, Nikki. That's my son-in-law. My daughter and my son-in-law met at the bus stop at the age of 14 years old.
Wow.
They started to go out at the age of 17. And they got married at 19. And now they'll be married next year for 25 years.
Wow.
And I told him after 30 days, there's no returning. I won't take her back. Got her. He's the skipper of our boat and he has 2 sons. One's in college and the youngest one from 2, 3 years old said, no, you save your money. I'm going fishing with Dad. And that's probably going to do that this summer. Yeah. That's when we had the open house. The young man in the background with a black hat right there, that's Christian, that's CJ. That's my that's my fisherman right there. My welder fisherman and my guinea rig. He's gonna be a good fisherman because he's a guinea rig artist, let me tell you. He was given that tour, actually answering all the questions that the people had. They really enjoy the working waterfront. When they're invited, they love opening up the boat and letting them tour. The boat also works for CMAS, and they do research trips to keep the scallop industry going. That's CJ again, giving this tour.
I think that's all I have for that too.
Yeah.
But I think the pictures do kind of tell a story, as
do.
well. And it's just
Yeah.
nice to see the family that you're all
Yeah.
families that you're talking about. We're going to wrap it up in a minute, but we could take, if there's just a few more
Can
comments.
I just ask, when is that they have the open house or the tours around the waterfront?
Tours are something that we probably
Or do you
couldn't
not do that?
do. So the festival was something that I was involved in starting, and it went from 2004 until, excuse me, 2015. Well, we did 2015, and we opened the Fishing Heritage Center. And we
Oh,
did
okay.
one more big festival in 2017, although it was coincided with sort of a hurricane. So all the boats were in, which was really exciting, but we couldn't have shucking contests because there were no scallops. So there were lots of things that didn't happen. Although the Elizabeth and Nikki, I think that was when we first had your boat, was that 2017 festival, and it was awesome. It was the best.
Oh, the crew loved it. They love showing off their tattoos. They love showing.
It was fabulous. I think they were all completely hoarse from talking by the end of the weekend. But and then we've done a couple of kind of little mini festivals since that time. It's just there's sort of not enough time, energy, money to do it all. So what I try to say to people is we've bottled the festival and put it in a building.
Oh, okay.
And it's the festival was a wonderful thing, but we are also really happy to have a place that people can come to almost 365 days a year. Not quite, we are closed for a few of the holidays, but I think it's really important in New Bedford that, for all these years we've celebrated the history of whaling, but there's a fishing industry that's been active, for more than 100 years. It's the economic engine for New Bedford. It's, such a huge part of our culture. And so to finally have a place that preserves that history and tells the story and thinks about, sort of keeping it all going, and hope, and from what you all are saying, and thank you all for your kind words, that, the fact that we're kind of knitting community together a bit is just really, I think, super important. So please come visit the Fishing Heritage Center. And on that note, I will say, so we are open. We had been closed for the first quarter of the year because we were working to install this huge new wonderful exhibit. And so it opened on April 15th, and we're free of charge up until July 1st. So come while it's free, or join and be a member, and then it'll be free for you forever, or be a volunteer and then you're automatically a member. That's kind of fun. So we invite you to come. We're open Thursday through Sunday from 10 until 4. And the center is located right downtown, right around the corner from the National Park and down the street from the Whaling Museum. And it's a really neat thing. And we are, hopefully we'll do some public tours over the summer months. We actually do that on a regular basis for all the cruise ship passengers who come into town, and that's starting up again this weekend. So, but I think, giving people opportunities to talk to people in the fishing community and to see the boats up close and all of that, I think is really important, because the lives that you live are very different. We all have similar aspirations, and we have kids and we want good things for them. And, there are some things that are just human experiences, but I do think that the worries that you have, the triumphs that you have, the sort of being apart from your loved ones and then having them come home and the reunions, all of that is really pretty unique. So thank the three of you very, very much for sharing, and Kathy too for jumping in and sharing. And thanks to everybody who's taken the evening tonight to hear the stories. Any last questions or comments or anything from the audience?
I just wanted to thank everybody. That was very good and interesting.
And Nina is a fisherman's mom and a volunteer.
Yeah.
As well. Well, thanks all. And I should also mention that next Friday, we actually, how is this going to work? Maybe I'll let Hannah explain. But next Friday, we have a discussion that sort of follows a film. So Hannah, how is that working?
Well, if you've come to any of our virtual documentaries over the last couple months, you know that we've been asking you to watch the films ahead of time. So the film for this month is called A Fish Story, and it's available on YouTube. It's a documentary was made about 20 years ago that profiles Shireen Davis out of Chatham and Angela Sanfilippo out of Gloucester and their work as activists for the fishing industry. So you watch the film ahead of time and then join us for a Zoom conversation. Shireen and Angela will be on the call to kind of talk about what's changed in the last 20 years and just give us a little more background on their work as activists in the industry. So that's next Friday at 7 p.m. also on Zoom. The links are on Facebook or our website calendar.